Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astuma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us. May our study be full of illumination. May it give us strength and enthusiasm, and may we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. There's an interesting experiment that we can make. Probably even as students, you may have made it. You can create a fire and see how the air is heated, and it has the characteristic that it rises up. You make it in a suitable enclosure, and it doesn't stay in its original place. That's one thing that we might notice. Perhaps we don't notice that some simultaneous action occurs as well, that where the air was displaced, a great rush of cold air comes in to take its place. Normally we emphasize the one, but don't pay too much attention to the other. This other aspect, however, is as equally important to the whole experiment, to the whole understanding. And so we must supplement our view that we normally take of what is sent out by an inquiry into what comes in. And what kind of quality is it? Where does it come from? This we call commonly reaction. The one we see is quite obvious, but the other one we hardly even notice. Now, there are certain things that we can easily understand. For example, if we break a stone to pieces, we take a hammer and break it to pieces, strike it nicely. We know that there's a law of entropy. Entropy is a measure of scrambledness. So when we break a stone into pieces, it's unimaginable that we will all make a collection and come back together. It's an irreversible process. And we can't imagine that when we break a stone into small fragments and pieces, that we will ever assemble and say, the law of karma dictates that we should get back to you and consolidate as a stone and fall on my head or break me to pieces. It never occurs to us that such a thing is ever feasible or possible. If we accidentally step on an ant, or even some people might do it deliberately, get rid of the ants and so on, or insects, it doesn't occur to us that over time they'll make a collection and get their revenge on me. We leave it as it is. And this is the way we view all our actions. We don't immediately look to understand, are there any consequences? After all, an ant is dead. It won't come back. Same thing with a human. And this attitude enables and drives somebody to murder somebody in secret or steal another person's wealth. We don't think there'll be a consequence. We're doing it in private. We think we can get away with it. So we can't imagine that this can happen. And when we stop imagining this and stop taking care of this, we can act as a community. Then it becomes a disaster. Collecting all these attitudes of non-consequentialism, we're quite happy to murder other people in the open. And we're quite happy to take their land and wealth, and this is called warfare. And it has the added psychological difficulty that it creates a revenge in the party that has been injured. So we take this attitude: how can the dead arise and get their revenge on me? And then, of course, the deep-seated bitterness and spirit of retaliation is a byproduct of this and compounds the difficulty for us. Us meaning the whole of the world community, both historically, now, and in the future. But in all of this, we would normally expect reactions to be affecting the immediate moment or the immediate thing. The only area where the first action falls, that's where we expect some form of reaction. We never expect it to be in a far-off distance or have long-lasting effects. You take, for example, the environment, and when I say the environment, I mean, the greenhouse gases that are being generated and all the rest of it. After the Second World War, or even during the Second World War, people were encouraged worldwide to go on a campaign, grow more food campaign. And in order to do this, people took various terraces, cut all the timber down. Many forests disappeared, and crops were planted. Even in Ireland today, the whole of the west of Ireland, which is so beautiful and picturesque with pastures and hills and lakes, it was all at one time forested. And man decided, let's clear away the forest and put some agriculture there and grow food. But of course, the result of that in the long term, when you deforest an area, the rainfall becomes less, crops become less as a result, and it becomes difficult to plant more trees. The land becomes barren. So this is an example of how, in the short term, we can get some great benefit from what we do. But in the longer term, it may have a disastrous effect, not just on that community, but globally also. Planting fresh big trees and so on, the whole campaign of forestation is taking place now on a movement, Green Africa. More and more trees being planted. And in some places, we're ignorant of what trees should be planted. And we again destroy the environment. Because we have no idea, firstly, about the global impact. And we have no idea about the impact on ourselves. We have no idea about the unseen reactions that will take place. We assume that the initial reaction will be good. A kind of short-sightedness. I was saying to somebody earlier, we're all suffering from short-sightedness. Of course, I wear spectacles, but in some way we're all wearing our own spectacles. We see the world in a very constrained way. And we don't really look further. And countless examples are available to us right now. When the Industrial Revolution came, we thought this concentration of urban life will give prosperity to everybody, to a whole nation. We never ever thought, more than 100, 150 years ago, of the greenhouse gases that would be emitted if uncontrolled. Since we look up in the sky and see vastness of air all around, we assume that this great, vast Mother Air will nicely accept everything. We never thought that nature will choke. And then it was in the 20th century that was discovered that limestone buildings were deteriorating because of the acidity in the air, sulfur dioxide in the air. So what looks to be something that is beneficial on a very limited population or with short-term effects and results, in the longer term, nature's reaction is not what we initially anticipate. So as far as some of the familiar natural phenomena is concerned, scientists are able, with their instrumentation, to measure the causal relationships between what we see as the effects in environmental degradation. But where's the instrument that can measure the effects of the internal forces? The internal forces of thoughts and aspirations, human duplicity, human generosity. There are no scientific instruments to measure those, but we can measure the effects. Since all of those things have their physical counterparts, because thought is the preceding force behind every activity. So it's clear that the mental forces regulate physical activities. And they regulate the physical activities of the owners. So rather, instead of phrasing it that way, we can say that those who have the limited freedom to transform their life and intelligence into a type of energy that moves physical bodies. And we can categorize physical bodies as your own physical body made from muscles and so on, or the furniture in rooms. These two types of objects are there, made from essentially the same stuff. It's also clear that joys and sorrows that we experience in the outer world are largely molded by the total impact of our combined mental forces. And they come out on the plane that constitutes our material environment. So if anyone is serious about it, they can, of course, record the correlationship between these. They can do it fairly accurately. They can connect links between their own jealousy and greed, and which are, of course, mental constructs. And then the fraud and the mischief and antisocial things that the limbs go and act in or enact. And so in the example I gave about the grow your own food and depleting the forests and seeing the immediate benefits of nutrition amongst the population, but not noticing nature's repercussion of deforestation. In the example, the immediate benefit, we're only assessing, we're only measuring it. The desire to grow more food, and immediately the following step, the cutting down of trees. But then the other part, of course, remains outstanding. Nature's reactions, beginning with the failure of rains, because when you take the forests away, you're taking the rains away too. All the moisture that is given off and all the oxygen that is necessary for our own atmosphere are all affected. So the corresponding feature in this example will be, in our human experience, the reactions from deeper levels that cause an excessive presentation of certain pains, and also withdrawal, of course, of pleasures. And these are proportionate to the flood of emotions that cause us danger, dangerous emotions that arise in the mind and really are the outcome of selfishness, egocentric activities. These egocentric activities, of course, are aimed at others. They're aimed against others. But actually, they're let loose on oneself. And why should this be? Because just as what happens in one place on the planet will affect the whole totality of the planet, what we call the jet stream is nothing static. It moves around the whole of the globe. And airplanes can take advantage of this and arrive ahead of time. See? And like a certain airline, when it arrives on time or before time, it heralds its announcement with a great fanfare. But it is really taking the aid of a jet stream. What we call weather is a combination of this rotating earth And this cloud of vapor that comes up, and the various currents that are associated with the movement of various currents that are accentuated by the Earth's movement itself, and the local conditions of pressure. An example of this pressure I gave when we started here, that was, you see, when a differential in pressure is complemented by a flow of cold air to replace the hot air, this we call a pressure differential. I have seen, for example, you can put a candle underneath a kind of rotating roundabout, some blades there. And the hot air rises up, of course, and the cold air forces in between and creates a convex current like this, and the blades turn. The angle of the blade catches the force, and the thing turns. And a child will look at that and wonder, how did this happen? So in the same way, there are unseen forces which are there that globally affect everything. But principally, all these intentions that are held against another for one's own advantage, actually, these are all let loose as a consequence on oneself primarily. So let's explain, by way of example, the Bhagavad-Gita passage in the 16th chapter, a beautiful passage there from 12 to 16. And there we are given a wonderful profile of humanity at large. So it begins like this. Ashapa sha shati bhutaha. See, or bhada kama krodha parayanaha. Bound by 100 ties of hope. You know, this whole disturbance of the mind that we have is a hope, and normally it's a hope in our favor. We become orientated. Nobody understands me. I hope for a better future. I hope for a better world. I hope for a better job. I hope that my health will improve. And this 100 ties of hope, of course, is more than that. But 100 is a significant term to say many, many, many. Given over to lust and anger. Anger, we know from previous passages, is stimulated by desire. When we fail to fulfill any desire, then we become angry, and this anger ranges in reaction from mild frustration. Whoa, excuse me. Mild frustration or irritation to outright outbursts. And so, when we are given over to the primal instincts, that is, when we are centered around our small universe and driven by genetic urges to propagate the species and to survive at all costs, and this is not happening for us, then anger arises. And they strive. How? By unjust means. That means selfish means. I was having a discussion the other day about what is morality and so on. It was an atheistic forum. And all kinds of things came out. But you see, it's very simple. Immorality is selfishness. Morality is selflessness. What more can you say? You can reduce it to simple words. They strive by unjust means to amass wealth for sensual enjoyment. And then it goes on, idam adya maya labdam. This has been gained by me today. There's an internal script. This has been gained by me today. This longing I shall fulfill. This is mine. And this wealth also shall be mine. With this kind of internal script, we go. And that enemy, aso maya ataha shatru, has been slain by me, and I shall slay the others too. I am the Lord. I am the enjoyer. I am successful. I am powerful. I am happy. There are many, many material courses, positive thinking courses around material wealth, misunderstanding the concept of positive thinking and saying, if you think positively, but these selfish sentiments, are they truly positive? And the answer is no. Because what we'll be doing is the effect, the repercussions will be all on you. Because the only way you can advance is to elbow your way and maneuver yourself amongst others, making sure that you are first, regardless, unjust means. So look at the script. And some people may give huge lectures. It is good to be successful. Be successful. They may even say at all costs. There are huge seminars and courses, people paying hundreds and hundreds of euros and dollars to attend these things. Motivation seminars, be successful, be driven by goals, and then be powerful and be happy. But you see, this drive toward happiness will come back as a reaction. It'll make you unhappy. Some further script goes on, according to Bhagavad-Gita. I am rich, I am well born. Who is there equal to me? I will sacrifice, I will make gifts, I will rejoice. In other words, I will bribe. Thus deluded by ignorance. In religion, people bribe as well. I'll give you this, but Lord, give me that. Very often it's phrased, I'm praying for my success. With faith that God will supply my success. See? But then what flavor the success will take? You may be successful, but may not be prepared for the fallout from it. And then you say, well, you never asked for it. Like ordering a meal in an American restaurant where they're so particular that you have to have this and not that, and this and not that. You're going into a supermarket there, and the same thing in Europe, but more so probably in America, where more varieties are there. And you can't just go and purchase milk, because there's fat-free milk, there's this proportion milk, there's that proportion milk, there's, artificial milk, there's, all kinds of milks are there on the shelf. I come from a simple country, Zimbabwe, where you can go and purchase milk, and that's all. There's only milk. You don't have fat-free milk and this milk and that milk. Milk is milk, and you purchase it. Cereal, cornflakes. Cornflakes is cornflakes. Only one variety there. It makes things much simpler. So in the same way, whatever you ask for issues as an intention. And that carries through, that thought carries through. Because if it didn't, the law of nature would not be consistent. That every thought movement that occurs is a force. And we know the consequences of this, that if I do all these things and think in these ways, then I can see what comes back on me. I can measure that. Now, I just conclude this. Bewildered by many a fancy, entangled in the meshes of delusion, addicted to the gratification of the senses, they fall into a foul hell. Now, theology tells us that hell is a kind of a place, but this is not what is meant there. It's not meant in an afterlife, post-mortem place, roasted on eternal fires and all that. No, it's what you're making here. Your heaven and hell is what you make here. By all these various thought movements, and all these statements are internal scripts reflecting how you're thinking and how you're feeling. So I can be physically strong and socially influential, and I can make others my slaves. I can use these to my advantage and oppress other people. So let's have a test of it. Supposing I bully others into submission and make them my slaves, then I can compel them to serve me. But on their side, they're inwardly keeping their own aspirations of freedom. And they do this in a spiritual way by appealing to God and asserting the idea that, and the faith that their God will rescue them, fully rescue them. On one side is an egocentric, selfish idea. On the other side is an idea of freedom because there's oppression, a legitimate desire. And so a persevering scientist, if you like, can interview all the victims. You can statistically compile from tabulated statements on the one side, 2 columns showing numerous iniquities on the one side, and you can see on the other column all the reactions of the sufferers in the form of surrender to God. But there's a vast field where the investigator cannot make any headway at all. And that's akin to the unseen force of the cold air coming in the example I first gave. You can't measure it. So on the one side, all these statements are there from the Bhagavad-Gita. Today I've gained this, other things shall be mine in due course. That enemy has already been slain, and so on. The rest will go on to the same way soon. I'm masterful, successful, happy, I'm rich, I'm well-born, all these things I mentioned. And who else is equal to myself like this? A part of my energy certainly goes for injuring the other party, but the vast majority of the energy goes into injuring me. Each time I say to myself, make this internal script, which is an injurious one, this part of my energy certainly goes for injuring others, but I reiterate, unable to resist me on account of that, no doubt, but the remainder, what about that? That's the major part. It's not directly here and now. It doesn't hit me like a thunderbolt and strike me down. So it is spent up in modifying me by distorting my mental structure. It compounds the distortion I have in my own mind. And it's not directly here and now. It takes time because, and there's no scientific instruments that will tell us this as yet and register exactly what happens there. Without being aware of my danger, it compounds in the unconscious mind. And I go on slowly transforming life and consciousness into coarse, arrogant, brutal, and murderous and accursed thought currents. Who is suffering in this case? It is me. And they go on poisoning me down to the tips of my very hairs and every part of every cell of every body. Every so many trillion cells vibrating in my body will vibrate with it. And it'll have its consequence because I'm relying on physical strength on the one hand and social dominance on the other. And this is sure to be shattered. And what will be the consequence of it? We'll tend to project and blame it on something else. My physical health is down because you see the flu virus is going around or the COVID virus is going around. Or you see, what a pity, something happened. Or I ate something harmful, I got indigestion. Or some fever thing, disease caught hold of me. My physical strength is shattered because must be old age or lack of exercise. Of course, many of these can be true, but mainly think about it now. Every thought movement that takes place is a force that gets transformed into the cells of your body initially. And this over time will have its effects. Same thing with social. If you're relying on, just as the Bhagavad-Gita says, I am wealthy, I'm successful, and all of these things, it just takes that much to change it all. A financial crisis. In 2008, such a financial crisis was there. all around greed. The bankers, that used to be a very revered profession. When I was a young boy, a bank manager was the most awesome and reputable person in a small community. He was seen to be the ultimate professional, along with doctors and lawyers. And then by 2008, the banking commission structure comes in and so on, and the whole world had suffered economically from that. We have to understand this unity of existence. The COVID virus has had one advantage for us. It tells us that we're all in the same boat. We're all vulnerable. And therefore, we should be much more compassionate for the furthest corners of the earth. And modern communications have put us immediately in touch with each other. It should surely be the death knell of harmful thoughts and feelings and actions, physical actions against each other. And yet today, there are still devastating wars in various parts of the world, in Yemen and all kinds of other places, more so because of the increased population in today's world, more so than in the history of man ever before. And so we can't blame our physical and social conditions, our rise and fall. The housing market can go in an instant. An earthquake in an instant can remove your house. And so when we assess in the course of time what these reactions are and how they will affect us, we have to take into account many, many different aspects. Of course, the physical body, our longevity, our social status, attitudes of parents and relatives toward us, our successes, our failures, all of these. And in short, every movement in the environment that contributes to our joys and sorrows. We are living in a moving, dynamic environment. Surely this must be understood by now, that nothing is standing still. Science has called this somehow the butterfly effect. Some movement occurs, let's say in the Amazon forest, and affects the whole thing, the whole world. The lungs of the earth are being cut down. The Amazon forests, the Congo, equatorial regions where abundant forests are there, and we are paying the price for it. Some say it's not too late to rescue it, but you can see our short-term vision is not adequate. And when we make these thought movements, they'll affect ourselves and they'll affect everybody around us, but primarily, I should stress, ourselves. If we can't think of it in this way, there's a law. It's not by chance. No matter how much we blame things on chance, it's a law. And this law is called the law of karma. Now, this term karma is largely misunderstood because it's become a popular term and has been emblazoned on T-shirts and all kinds of things with very little understanding. And all this misunderstanding has highlighted certain aspects of this karma. But you see, it comes from this krit, to do. And this action, this active aspect, we think it's to do with limbs. We think it's to do with hands and legs. We think it's to do with the physique. No, to do everything that shifts and moves, every force, every energetic force that moves a material thing, even that is action. In fact, it's primary action that moves things. In order to perform any action, some other than unconscious actions, of course, instinctive actions throughout the body, like digestion of food, heart pumping, and so on. These are all instinctive actions. Learned, no doubt, by the way, through the process of evolution. But the conscious actions are these that we have a control over. And if you don't mobilize these forces in a correct way, and a trained way, then the consequences will be there for you. You can't blame anybody else. If you say there was a banking crisis in 2008, and the bankers are at fault, well, you should also blame those people who fell into their trap and took unreasonable mortgages on. Both are culpable. Both suffered from greed. And the consequences of greed are for them, but for the whole world. And so it's quite accurate to say we're living in a global village. So this word karma is used for all things, all forces. And force, from Newton's point of view, is the thing that moves something. Force, for something to move, there has to be a force. And to stop, another force is there. Acceleration, inertia has to be there. And energy, really, that term wasn't ever used in those days, is a force applied to an object. Something moves an object. And you can measure that in terms of mass. And you can see what the velocity is and so on. The equations to do with all of that. All to do with force. And then to escalate that into the universe was the next step. So every movement is karma. And what that implies is it's not just the movement, but it's the reaction and the consequence. He says, first we have to bear in mind that we are all debtors to the world, and the world doesn't owe us anything. He says it's a great privilege for all of us to be allowed to do anything for the world. In helping the world, we really help ourselves. We can equally say, in damaging the world, we are damaging ourselves. The second point is that there is an entity in this universe, a God in this universe. It is not true that this universe is drifting and stands in need of help from you and me. God is ever present thereon or therein. He is undying and eternally active and infinitely watchful. Where the whole universe sleeps, he sleeps not. He is working incessantly, and all the changes and manifestations of the world are his. Thirdly, we ought not to hate anyone. This world will always continue to be a mixture of good and evil, he says. Our duty is to sympathize with the weak and to love even the wrongdoer. The world is a grand moral gymnasium wherein we have all to take exercise so as to become stronger and stronger spiritually. Fourthly, we ought not to be fanatics of any kind, because fanaticism is opposed to love. You hear fanatics glibly saying, I do not hate the sinner, I hate the sin. But I am prepared to go any distance to see the face of that man who can really make a distinction between the sin and the sinner. It is easy to say so. If we can distinguish well between quality and substance, we may become perfect men. It's not easy to do this. And further, the calmer we are and the less disturbed our nerves, the more shall we love and the better will our work be. A wonderful statement. You see, what we call nature, we don't make any distinction in the Vedanta between God and God's manifested form, which we call nature. And nature has its laws. And the law is fixed. Sowing and reaping is the law. And whatever, we are given the freedom and capacity, limited freedom no doubt, to sow something, to make a subtle input. But then we have to see that whatever we put in will have a reciprocal result and reaction. The physical law of nature says, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. We shouldn't be surprised about it. So there's no chance. It is all the play of the law. There is a law that enacts it. So as we sow, so we reap, that's the law. And we think, so we become, not necessarily others become. So do we change the world by our thoughts? The answer, of course, is yes. And how do we know this? Because of our scientific understanding of how thought moves and operates, mobilizing the environment in its subtle forms until it condenses into scenes and events in front of us. But don't forget, we are part of those scenes. And the immediate impact comes onto us, the majority comes onto us. We can easily understand this. If we are worried, won't we get stomach trouble? If we are jealous, won't all the cells of the body take up that theme and operate with it, enact our wish? It's like a commander of a ship or a vessel saying, let us move in this direction, let's avoid the storm here or go into the storm there. The rest will simply obey. We have to understand the body is simply a vessel like this, made from yesterday's food. Nothing more, nothing less. So the answer, of course, is yes, we change the world, but primarily the change is in ourselves. At the unconscious level, we make all the patterns and themes habitual. And if we are in any way obsessed by these various statements that the Bhagavad-Gita so beautifully puts out, and don't transform these into something more useful, given the pocket money that we have of life, and given the pocket money we have of all the resources that we have, including thought, will we not use it to transform our life in some better way? And when we do that, we can't avoid from having that effect on others, since we are born to manifest this glory from within and spread it everywhere, not to enclose ourselves in a cocoon of selfishness. So the change aspect of our inside develops, and it develops like an extra invisible limb, like a kind of grabbing arm, and draws to us just the people and experiences that are moral equivalents of our habitual thinking. These mental forces we generate and turn down into the habit level. So knowing this, why don't we change things? Why don't we choose wisely the type of thought and feeling that we have as individuals and also as communities? Now, when in the mental field, I'll repeat some of the things that I have previously repeated in these talks. So what is the way of making this transformation? We can list it as a number of R's. The first R would be the reaction that takes place. And we have this advantage, we are not mixed up with all the emotions, we can watch them. In the previous guided meditation, slightly disrupted by external noise, but we saw very clearly how we can review things, we can review our deepest feelings. But as soon as we get identified with them, we're in trouble. As soon as we detach from them and stand back, we can see things clearly. Now we're in a commanding position and a witnessing position. The witnessing position automatically tells us we are not involved. Just like a military general standing on a platform, reviewing the troops coming and going, we can also review what came and went in the mental field. We won't try to stop it because we know that on the basis that every action has an equal and opposite reaction, immediately no psychologist will ever say repress your thought or repress your feeling. Let it come, let it go. And all these reactions have their origin in the past, when you were 4 or 5, whatever it was. Let's say somebody stole your toy and you got angry and you cried and you ran and you stamped. Of course, this is socially unacceptable behavior in adult life, but we express it exactly internally in the same way. In the same way, we still internally stamp. Internally, we feel angry. Internally, why? Because internally, we're still asserting and identifying with the emotion that we have instead of a wave that's coming and going. As soon as we say, I am angry, we identify it as a wave, says Swami Vivekananda. Beautifully put. So we take this first reaction and understand it has its origin in our childhood. And that's the second step, which is to review it. Where did this come from? I recognize this as my inner child, as psychology wants to put it. My childish nature. Well, I am now grown. I don't have to adopt the same kind of reactive behavior. So knowing where it comes from, I can nicely review it like a general reviewing its troops. And an attitude, a friendly attitude, not a hostile one, not one that will repress or suppress. Invite all these thoughts and feelings, come if you like, stay if you can, have a cup of tea, and go if you must. But the next second, you can put something in. You can make a revaluation of any situation and put it in its true context. And scripture and philosophy helps because it tells us, actually, my dear person, only God is standing there. That's the truth of it. When you analyze it from a philosophical point of view, when you feel it as well, it's not sufficient to see God in everyone. We have to feel that. And we cannot feel it until we feel it in ourselves. Feeling it in ourselves, we feel it elsewhere. So feeling that, we can now revise our reactions. And we can learn to do this process so habitually, so easily, so naturally, that it becomes second nature. And we can formulate a different kind of reaction and sustain it this second, next second, next second, next second, put it in, put it in, put it in, until we have made a neutralization. Then what will be the effect on us? Every single cell of the body will thrive on it, will vibrate with it. And since we cannot lock that in, since we are a living, breathing magnetic field, it will spread everywhere. And ultimately we can be an open channel for the distribution of divine grace everywhere, blessing every corner, blessing every person, uplifting everybody, living for the welfare of all beings. And so ultimately our revised and replaced reaction becomes habitually our initial reaction. So initial question was with people say playing and making a disturbance and making some trouble and behaving in a socially erratic way, how will we deal with it? We'll deal with it with patience. Where does the patience come from? It comes from a certain attitude. It comes from a process, one jarring moment, followed by a little bit of reasoning, followed by a better understanding of the situation, a more truthful understanding that is not immediately obvious. Not immediately obvious because we are dealing with things from an isolated individual way. It is said that Western culture are specialists in independence and individuality, freedom of the psychophysical self, the individuality, whereas in Eastern cultures, they are more community orientated. Be that as it may, we have to understand that there is only one thing there. Because each position is a position of units, separateness, a separate community and a separate individual, but they're still separate units. When I start seeing the world as only one thing, and when I see its very foundation is only one, and all the other things are manifested modifications, then my whole way of thinking shifts. And when my thinking shifts, my activities shift. And when my activities shift, then the effects, positive effects, come to the single local unit that I call I, and beyond those borders to everybody else and everything else. So this is how the saints operate, with the same equipment as everybody, the same equipment as you and I, a strong body, a strong will, a mind that can be molded, shaped, directed, and the capacity to transform all our reactions in a positive way. So just to review, the first thing, we react. We allow the reaction to come and go, and we only allow it a limited time. 1 second, 2 seconds most. Maybe 4 seconds if we're generous in the beginning. Then we review. Where did this come from? In reviewing, we're putting ourselves in a witnessing position that is immediately detaching from it. Otherwise, the alternative is to get caught up in it, and only the reaction is there. And then, after a while, a reevaluation of the situation, putting in some better value, something that is more in perspective. And then replacing our initial reaction with multiple reactions, transforming the raw material of life and life and thought and energy in such a way that it becomes a useful thing. So there is no other entity in the world that has this capacity to transform all the inundating forces around us that seem to be something we have to combat and struggle against. When you look at how a beautiful rose flower can grow so nicely in compost, things that people have discarded, things which are subject to bacterial rotting and fungi, things which smell. The bacteria are so bad that we can smell the compost. Now there's a dialogue between the two. The flower doesn't say, look, I know that you smell very bad from my point of view, and maybe I smell very strange from your point of view. But if you think that the product of all your crud and all your rotting stuff should be rotting stuff, I'm afraid I can't do it, but I know how to transform what you have into something that I have, what I have, a beautiful rose flower that smells so wonderful that the scent is generously distributed everywhere regardless. Not only that, but my generosity allows bees to come and visit me, and I'll provide a nice landing pad for them, and they can take as much of the pollen as they like, knowing that it'll be distributed freely everywhere and other flowers will grow from it. And you're going to convert that OB into some precious honey, something that nourishes a whole community. And then we can allow others, such as man, to take a portion of it and put it on their bread and in their tea. So such a wonderful symbiotic relationship is there, all indicating how nature works so smoothly, and the lesson that we can learn, that we can transform any so-called unfortunate, struggling situation in life, and we can transform it into something glorious, something that spreads everywhere for the benefit of all. And all is an all-inclusive term. It includes myself as well. So this talk then about transformation and how we not only can transform our own thinking and therefore our own behavior in a beneficial way for ourselves and others, considering that we are living in a holistic environment, that there's no intrinsic separation between this that we identify as a unit and everything else. It is all one thing, one ocean, if you will. I sometimes give the example, supposing I'm a giant, something like Gulliver, and I stand in waters and the waters come up to my ankle. And previously, somebody had told me there are 7 continents, separate pieces of land. But I'm so big, I step into the oceans, the water only coming up to my ankles, and I wriggle my toes in the mud and the bottom of the ocean there nicely, making nice small waves and troughs there at the bottom of the sea. But for me, there are no 7 continents. There's only one landmass. Some of it rises above the water, and some of it I can wriggle my toes in. And so this is the holistic view that we have to have, even on a material level, But it can be hugely elevated when we see that it is one substance that is seemingly modified in these different ways. And that gives us a surge, internal surge of joy. And that joy is not self-contained. The joy intrinsically is spread everywhere. Like Jesus said, you cannot hide your light under a bushel or a bed. It is there naturally to shine. And that shining, of course, will light up every other face. So we'll finish this off now. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.